provide us with the readings this morning. I just want to say it's amazing to have to fight for space in a choir loft.
The first reading is taken from the book of Malachi, chapter 4. Look, the day is coming, burning like an oven. All the arrogant ones and all those doing evil will become straw. The coming day will burn them, said the Lord of heavenly forces, leaving them neither root nor branch. But the Son of Righteousness will rise on those revering my name. Healing will be in its wings, so that you will go forth and jump about like calves in the stall. The second reading is taken from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18. As Jesus came to Jericho, a certain blind man was sitting beside the road begging. When the man heard the crowd passing by, he asked what was happening. They told him, Jesus the Nazarene is passing by. The blind man shouted, Jesus, Son of David, show me mercy. Those leading the procession scolded him, telling him to be quiet, but he shouted even louder, Son of David, show me mercy. Jesus stopped and called for the man to be brought to him. When he was present, Jesus asked, What do you want me to do for you? He said, Lord, I want to see. Jesus said to him, Receive your sight. Your faith has healed you. Once he was able to see and began to follow Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they praised God too. Hear what the Spirit is saying through these ancient words of Scripture.
Thanks be to God. I don't use that mic. I just need it out of my line of sight. When I was a little kid, little teeny one, like the ones down here, I was told the Bible is filled with stories, and it is. And so we're going to do some thinking about stories for a minute this morning. I didn't like the one from Malachi, at least the first verse. Folks getting burned like straw in an oven. That's not my God. But I did like the second image because as a prairie boy, I grew up on those flat lands to the east of you. Every spring, I got to drive through the countryside and see all those little brown and white or black critters bouncing around in the fields. It was a joy and a delight that they were expressing in being alive, and the winter was basically over, and they could start to enjoy and have fun and test their skills and strength and become who God had created them to be. It was an exciting moment, and it resonated with me when that passage was read because we all have a great deal of joy in the movement and antics and activities of the young as they begin to find their way. And it's not just the young. It's anyone who along the way in their journey discovers they've got a new dance or a new step or a new way to be or a new thing to walk in, and they have joy and delight in that moment. The joy and the wonder of discovery is exciting. And then we come to Luke's story, and that's a mixed story. I said in the early service this morning that this story appears in all the Gospels. It does not appear only once in each of the Gospels. It's there several times, 2, maybe more. But only once, and in Mark's Gospel, not in Luke or Matthew, is the person who is blind given a name. So I'm going to use the name that Mark used. I'm going to call him Bart for Bartimaeus. Old Bart. He's been a fixture on the corner of that street in Jericho for his whole life. And we've gone by him as good citizens of Jericho. We've dropped some coins on his cloak to help him find some food. Or maybe if we were feeling generous, we dropped him a scarf or a pair of sandals or something. Bart's been there. He's a fixture in our life, in our world. He's just one of the many who sit on our street corners and sidewalks and back alleys, looking, seeking for something more. But this day, a phenom is coming to town. If you don't know the term phenom, you're younger than me or older than me or whatever it is. A phenomenon. Somebody very famous is coming to town. Jesus. We've heard people talk about him. Some people like him. Some think he's great. Others think he's, a disturber. There could be other words with that. He's coming to town. He's coming down the street. And you're in the crowd. And behind you, against the edge of the building, is Bart. You don't even have to turn around. You know he's there. You have to take a deep breath maybe. Or you have to hear him mumbling in the background. And he asks you who's coming, and you tell him with excitement in your voice. And suddenly you find yourself shoved aside by Bart, who's hollering, yelling, Jesus, have mercy on me. Is that any way to treat a hero coming to town? If your favorite pop music star were walking down the street over here, would you think that was what we should be doing? So you kind of push him back. Go away. Be quiet. But Bart doesn't be quiet. And he stops the whole dang parade. A couple of years back, I was at a Candy Day parade in Coaldale, Alberta. They give out about 10,000 pounds of candy in the short time they're driving around town. But at one point, this little one ran right out into the middle of the street and stood in front of this truck coming down with people all over it. And she said, I don't like this candy. I want my favorite kind. I think she was Bart in a younger age. Jesus, stop. I want to be able to live. And Jesus stops and gives him what he asks. This morning is not a sermon time to get into the business of healing and what that means, nor into a discussion of how many others then or now cry out for new life and get left at the side of the road. Those are topics for another morning. They're important topics. But I'd like to focus on Bart himself and the crowd's response to him. One of the commentators for today is a wise woman who I enjoy reading. It's a long quote I'd like to offer you, but I think it's very important. So let me try to read it to you with some of what I think were her emphases. She's talking about the crowd. How often do we feel like we are required to keep silent? How often are we asked to keep our voices down, lest there is some offense that would cause a disruption in our controlled and contrived world? Lest there be an utterance that might tear apart that which we've constructed to keep out? How often do we silence others, convinced that their cries for mercy are not worthy of God's attention? This is, she says, this is what we do. We keep silent. We urge others to do the same. Speaking out, that's a risk. If you state your opinion, you could be rejected. If you say what you think is really true about gospel and faith, well, get ready to be rejected. But Jesus says the truth will set us free. Truth quiets results when it's held captive. Truth silenced ends up in imprisonment. Truth shushed leads to bondage. At some point, at some time, someone needs to speak the truth. One of the great challenges of being a follower of Jesus is to learn to walk and talk as Jesus walked and talked. To do and say what he did and said, so that his message of justice and hope and healing and loving acceptance can be spread, continue to be spread around in the culture in which we live. Daily, the many Bartimaeuses in the city of Kelowna are on the doorsteps of our lives. Not just our church, but on our lives. Like old Bart himself, their needs are huge. Their presence is disturbing to the status quo that some think is what life is supposed to be. I am proud to be associated with a community of faith that takes seriously the challenge of seeking to deal humanely with the many men and women of all ages whose need causes them to cry out for help. Even if it's only an old pair of jeans, or a sandwich, or some leftover chicken to take with them for an evening meal, or a warm place to sleep when they're scared. I'm delighted to be amidst a group of people who will not accept violence being done to those who act and live out their lives differently. I'm delighted to be part of a community that accepts persons whose sexuality is expressed in many and various ways and who can find within our facility freedom from violence and fear. The many stories I'm hearing about this congregation and its history tell me that over the years together, you have not been the voices of repression in the crowd. You have been those who assisted him to his feet, steered him toward Jesus, encouraged him not only to find new life, but to become one of those who follow Jesus. So I celebrate what we have been and done, what we are and continue to be. The challenge is, what more is Jesus asking of us? Where do we go from here? Who are the voices today calling us to make room for them? To invite them into a renewing of their lives, a healing of their brokenness. And how shall we do that? Where shall we do that? With what resources shall we do that? These are the questions that fill this church. Because you are faith-filled people seeking to follow Jesus. I find it difficult sometimes to be a minister. Because even as I stand before you and talk about what you've been and where you might go, I find myself filled with nervousness. Because if I speak too much truth, you know where to tell me the door is. If I speak too much truth, you might use the door yourself instead of giving it to me. So instead I ask the questions. Where is God calling us to be? That's why the pop quiz. Because I believe that the Holy Spirit is speaking in the midst of this congregation to lead us into a future. We just need to figure out how to hear what's being said. We need to listen. And then, as my kids would tell me, Dad, suck it up. We need to have the courage to follow where God's leading. I think it's exciting to be part of a community of faith that wrestles with how do we live that faith out. That leaves doorways open for people to constantly question and challenge and to even to say to Bob, you don't have to be so authoritative. I've got some ideas too. And to get me to listen. I think it's important for us to be a community that is constantly growing. And I'm delighted to be here. But I'm even more delighted that over the next few days, I'm going to get to read all of your pop quizzes. Every one of them. You didn't have to sign your name, remember? And I'm going to hear, hopefully, the voice of the Spirit so that I can reflect that back to you. And together, we can choose how to follow God so that we might continue to be ones who offer healing and hope and newness of life to the people in this community. Thank you for your quiz answers. Thank you for your gracious allowing me to be amongst you and to speak what I feel. And thank you that we can journey together into that future. May it be so. Amen.